Most people with high blood pressure spend years adjusting their medication, cutting their salt, and still watching their numbers refuse to move. What almost nobody tells them is that several of the compounds most studied for this exact problem are already sitting in their kitchen. Picture the spice cabinet above your stove. There's probably cinnamon in there, garlic powder, ginger, turmeric, maybe cayenne, cardamom tucked in the back, barely touched. You bought those spices for flavor, but researchers have been studying those exact ingredients in published clinical trials with real hypertension patients. And in some of those studies, the results were comparable to what low-dose medication achieved. Most people with high blood pressure have never heard this, and most doctors don't bring it up. Today, we're going through 7 of them, what each one does inside your body, what the actual research found, and how to start using them this week. Let's go. Before the spices, it helps to understand what's actually happening inside your blood vessels. Have you ever checked your blood pressure at home on a calm morning and seen a perfectly reasonable number, and then had it spike at a doctor's appointment during a stressful phone call or after climbing a flight of stairs? Most people chalk that up to nerves or exertion. Normal stuff. But those sudden swings often reveal something specific: blood vessels that have lost their ability to flex when demand increases. Healthy arteries expand to handle the extra load. Stiffened ones can't, so pressure spikes instead. That's the real story, and it usually starts years before any number on a standard lab test raises a flag. Think of your arteries like flexible garden hoses. When they're healthy, the walls are smooth, slightly elastic, blood moves easily, and pressure stays manageable. But 4 things tend to go wrong over time, especially after 50. First, the inner lining of your vessels, a paper-thin layer called the endothelium, starts producing less nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is the signal that tells vessel walls to stay open and relaxed. Less of it means the walls gradually tighten, the hose narrows, pressure climbs. Second, a system called the renin-angiotensin system, your body's pressure management department, sometimes overcorrects. It tells your vessels to squeeze when they don't need to, like a thermostat stuck in too high mode. Third, chronic low-grade inflammation quietly stiffens arterial walls over years. A stiff hose can't absorb the force of blood flow the way a flexible one can. And the fourth mechanism is one most people focused on blood pressure never hear about. When your body struggles to manage blood sugar over time, from processed carbohydrates, hidden sugars, or the metabolic slowdown that comes with age, it creates low-level irritation inside the delicate inner lining of your vessels. The walls stop being smooth and elastic. They become stiff, narrowed, and less responsive. A healthy artery handles extra demand easily, like a wide, flexible hose. An artery stiffened by years of metabolic stress is more like a narrow, rigid straw. Force the same volume of liquid through that straw, and the pump has to work twice as hard. Pressure spikes fast, especially during any additional stress. This is precisely why blood pressure can look normal on a quiet Tuesday morning and spike sharply during a difficult conversation or a brisk walk to the car. The system has lost its flexibility buffer. Here's what makes this important for everything that follows. Each of the 7 spices we're about to cover works on at least one of those 4 mechanisms. Some work on 2. A few appear to work on 3 simultaneously. That's not a coincidence. It's why these compounds have been studied so consistently in cardiovascular research for decades. Let's start with the one that has the most research behind it: garlic. The same thing your grandmother used in everything. And the science takes it very seriously. When you crush or chop a fresh garlic clove, a chemical reaction produces a sulfur compound called allicin. And allicin has a specific effect on your cardiovascular system that researchers have documented in multiple clinical trials. It acts as a natural inhibitor of ACE, angiotensin-converting enzyme. That's the same enzyme that an entire class of blood pressure medications, ACE inhibitors, is designed to block. When ACE activity is reduced, your blood vessels receive less of the signal telling them to squeeze. They stay more open. Pressure eases, but garlic doesn't stop there. It also appears to stimulate nitric oxide production inside arterial walls, the same molecule that tells vessels to stay relaxed and flexible. So garlic is doing 2 things at once: reducing the chemical signal that tightens your vessels while increasing the chemical signal that loosens them. A review examining 12 clinical studies involving more than 550 adults with diagnosed hypertension found that regular garlic consumption was associated with an average reduction of 8.3 millimeters of mercury in systolic blood pressure and 5.5 millimeters of mercury diastolic. Both numbers measurable, consistent. To put that in perspective, that range is comparable to what some low-dose AC inhibitor medications produce from a food that costs under $1. Walter was a 63-year-old retired pipe fitter. His blood pressure sat around 154/92, and his doctor had recently discussed adding a second medication. Walter said, "I want to feel like I'm doing something, not just waiting for a prescription to do all the work." He started adding 3 to 4 cloves of fresh garlic, crushed and lightly cooked, into his dinner every night. Nothing else changed. At week 7, his readings were averaging 141/85. His doctor noticed at his next visit and asked what changed. When Walter told him, his doctor was skeptical until he reviewed 6 weeks of Walter's home log. One addition, consistent. That's what the research describes, and that's what Walter experienced. Practical note. Light cooking preserves more of garlic's active compounds than extended high heat. Crush or chop it and let it sit 10 minutes before adding heat. That gives the Allicin reaction time to complete. The second spice surprises most people when they hear it. Ginger appears to work through 2 separate blood pressure mechanisms, and one of them mirrors the action of a specific class of prescription medication. Here's how. Your arterial walls are lined with smooth muscle cells that tighten and relax based on how much calcium moves through channels in their membrane. When too much calcium enters, the cells contract, arteries narrow, pressure rises. This is the exact mechanism that calcium channel blocker medications target. The active compounds in ginger, gingerols, shogols, zingarone, appear to interfere with that calcium entry. The muscle cells stay calmer. The arteries stay more open. And simultaneously, ginger also inhibits ACE, the same enzyme garlic targets. So ginger is doing what a calcium channel blocker does and what an ACE inhibitor does in a single route that costs about $2 at any grocery store. A published meta-analysis of 6 randomized controlled trials found consistent ginger consumption was associated with a reduction of approximately 6 millimeters of mercury systolic and around 2 millimeters of mercury diastolic compared to placebo. The effective dose in those trials was as little as 3 grams per day, less than a teaspoon of ground ginger. Margaret was a 69-year-old retired nurse. Her blood pressure averaged around 147/89. She'd also been managing chronic joint pain with over-the-counter anti-inflammatories almost daily for over a year. Here's something many people don't realize. Certain common OTC pain relievers, specifically NSAIDs, can raise blood pressure with regular use, particularly in older adults. We discussed ginger because it also has well-documented anti-inflammatory effects. The same compounds that act on blood vessels reduce inflammatory markers associated with joint pain. She began adding fresh ginger to her morning tea and ground ginger to her evening cooking. Over about 8 weeks, she needed the OTC pain relievers less frequently, and her blood pressure moved to 133/81 at her next check-in. She told us, "I was expecting to choose between my joints and my blood pressure. I didn't realize one thing could help both." Not everyone will have that experience, but the dual mechanism is real, and it's why ginger shows up consistently in cardiovascular and anti-inflammatory research. Here's the one that gets the most skeptical reactions. Cinnamon, the thing on your oatmeal, the thing in holiday baking. It doesn't sound like medicine, which is exactly why most people never think of it that way. It contains a compound called cinnamaldehyde, and cinnamaldehyde does something specific to your arterial walls. It causes them to relax. This process, vasodilation, is the widening of blood vessels. It's the fundamental outcome that many blood pressure medications are engineered to produce. Cinnamaldehyde achieves this partly by interfering with calcium entering smooth muscle cells, similar to ginger, and partly by working directly on the endothelium to reduce the baseline tension the walls are holding. A review of 9 clinical studies involving 641 participants found that regular cinnamon consumption was associated with an average reduction of 6.2 millimeters of mercury systolic and 3.9 millimeters of mercury diastolic, both numbers. Meaningful reductions. From a spice used in actual cooking, not a laboratory extract. Harold was a 67-year-old retired mail carrier, did everything right by conventional health standards, walked daily, healthy weight, didn't smoke or drink, and his blood pressure was still consistently 151/90. When we looked at what he was eating, the picture became clearer. His diet was healthy but narrow. His spice cabinet was essentially salt, pepper, and dried oregano. He started adding half a teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon, the lighter-colored variety, to his morning oatmeal every single day. One important note here, there are two main types of cinnamon. Cassia, the common dark variety, contains a compound called coumarin that at high daily amounts over long periods can stress the liver. For occasional cooking, cassia is fine. For a deliberate daily addition, Ceylon cinnamon, sometimes labeled true cinnamon, is the wiser choice. It contains very little coumarin. Spice number 4, turmeric. You've almost certainly heard about turmeric, and a lot of what gets said about it, especially in supplement marketing, overstates what the research actually shows. So let's be precise. The active compound is curcumin, and curcumin works specifically on the endothelium, that paper-thin inner lining of your arteries. That endothelial layer gradually becomes less functional as we age. It produces less nitric oxide. It becomes more reactive to inflammation. It becomes, in clinical terms, stiffer and less responsive. This process, endothelial dysfunction, is increasingly understood as one of the central drivers of age-related hypertension. A study tracking consistent curcumin intake over 12 weeks found measurable improvements in endothelial function, specifically increased nitric oxide availability and reduced oxidative stress inside vessel walls. The lining became more responsive. A systematic review specifically examining curcumin's blood pressure effects found meaningful reductions in diastolic pressure, with the most consistent benefits appearing in studies lasting 12 weeks or longer. That timeline is important. Turmeric works slowly and cumulatively. It's the one that, used consistently over months, begins to support the gradual restoration of endothelial function that aging slowly erodes. And there is one critical practical note. Curcumin is very poorly absorbed on its own. It passes through without entering the bloodstream in useful concentrations, unless it's paired with black pepper. Black pepper contains piperine, and piperine significantly increases curcumin absorption. Always pair turmeric with black pepper. In food, in tea, in supplements. Always. Spice 5. Cayenne pepper. The active compound in cayenne is capsaicin, and capsaicin works through a mechanism that's genuinely distinct from everything else we've discussed. It activates a receptor in the cells lining your blood vessels, called TRPV1. When capsaicin binds to this receptor in the endothelium, those cells respond by increasing nitric oxide production. More nitric oxide, more arterial relaxation, lower pressure. But capsaicin also appears to work through something called substance P, a compound involved in how your nervous system regulates vascular tone. When capsaicin reduces substance P activity in arterial tissue, those vessels experience less of the constricting signal they were receiving. 2 pathways, 1 spice. If you genuinely can't tolerate heat, the research suggests even small amounts of cayenne may produce meaningful effects on nitric oxide levels. You don't need to turn every meal into something that makes your eyes water. A light addition to soups, eggs, or roasted vegetables is enough to be relevant. If you have a history of acid reflux, gastritis, or IBS, go very slowly. Spice number 6, cardamom. Cardamom may be the least familiar spice on this list for most North American viewers. It's been central to cooking across South Asia, the Middle East, and Scandinavia for centuries. And when scientists tested it in clinical trials, the results were more consistent than most people expect. A 12-week study published in the Indian Journal of Biochemistry and Biophysics found that participants with hypertension who took 3 grams of cardamom powder daily experienced significant reductions in blood pressure, with readings returning to normal range by the end of the study period. Cardamom appears to work through antioxidant pathways, reducing oxidative stress in arterial tissue, and may also have mild diuretic properties that help ease excess fluid retention, which can contribute to elevated pressure. James was a 70-year-old retired engineer. He started adding a quarter teaspoon of ground cardamom to his morning coffee. He described the flavor as almost like a better version of coffee. At his 3-month check-in, both his systolic and diastolic had moved meaningfully downward. He said the strangest part was that it felt like he hadn't done anything difficult at all. The flavor is warming, slightly floral, subtly sweet. It works well in oatmeal, coffee, tea, smoothies, and certain savory dishes. It's one of the more pleasant spices to start with if you're new to this. Spice 7. Hibiscus. Hibiscus occupies a unique position on this list. It's not a dried spice you'd find in a shaker. It's most commonly consumed as a tea. Dried hibiscus flowers steeped in hot water, deep crimson in color, with a flavor that sits somewhere between tart and floral. When researchers tested it properly in a controlled trial, the results were notable. A study published in the Journal of Nutrition found that adults with pre-hypertension or mild hypertension who drank 3 cups of hibiscus tea daily for 6 weeks experienced an average reduction of 7.2 millimeters of mercury in systolic blood pressure compared to a placebo group. That's not a small number from a cup of tea. Hibiscus is rich in anthocyanins, the same class of compounds that give blueberries and red cabbage their color. These appear to inhibit ACE activity and reduce oxidative stress in vascular tissue simultaneously. 2 of the 4 mechanisms we discussed at the start. From a beverage that costs cents per serving. 3 cups daily becomes effortless once it's a routine. 1 cup in the morning while you read, 1 in the afternoon instead of a second coffee, 1 in the evening while you wind down. The routine builds itself. The taste is tart, similar to cranberry. Some people add a small amount of honey to balance it. It can be brewed hot or served over ice. Here's the part that matters most. None of the people we just discussed overhauled their entire lives. Walter added garlic to dinner. Margaret added ginger to tea. Harold added cinnamon to the oatmeal he was already eating. Small, specific, consistent. And the research reflects exactly that. These studies measured the isolated effect of adding 1 spice consistently over 6 to 12 weeks, not what happens when people completely rebuild their diets. Your arteries respond to consistent input. Every day you give them something that supports nitric oxide production, something that eases tension in those vessel walls, something that works against the low-grade inflammation that stiffens them. That's a day the system moves in the right direction. It's never too late for your choices to matter. Step 1, pick one and start this week. Not 7. 1. Which one resonated most? Which involves a spice or flavor you already enjoy? Start there. Consistency over 6 weeks outperforms adding 7 things for 3 days every time. Step 2. Make it automatic, not effortful. The reason most dietary changes don't stick is that they require constant decision-making. Every day, you have to remember to do it. Every day, that's an opportunity to forget. Attach your new addition to something you already do without thinking. Oatmeal is already automatic for a lot of people. Cinnamon goes there. Your morning coffee is already automatic. A pinch of cardamom or ginger goes there. The pot of soup you make most Sunday nights, that's where turmeric and black pepper go. Habit layering, new behavior, old anchor, that's how things actually stick. Step 3, track your readings at home. A home blood pressure monitor, available at most pharmacies for under $40, is one of the most underused tools in managing this condition. Take readings at the same time each day. Write them down. After 4 to 6 weeks, you'll have actual data to look at and to share with your doctor. If you want a simple step-by-step plan to build on everything we've covered today, that's exactly why we put together the 30-Day Blood Pressure Reset Foundation. It's designed for beginners, people who want realistic, sustainable habits instead of extreme advice or overnight fixes. And it's built around your pace, your choice. There's no pressure to do everything at once. On the nutrition side, it uses the DASH eating approach, the diet specifically developed to support healthy blood pressure, with 3 different calorie levels so you can find what fits your body and your life. You pick the one that works for you and adjust from there. The movement side gives you 5 different fitness challenges to choose from depending on where you're starting. If you haven't exercised in a while, the interval walking challenge is the most accessible place to begin. Low impact, no equipment. The wall sit and plank challenge builds strength through simple isometric holds that research has specifically connected to blood pressure support. As you get comfortable, there are upper body, lower body, and core options to build from there. Everything comes with a daily progress calendar so you can check off each day as you go. It sounds simple, but seeing those boxes fill up over 30 days is its own kind of motivation. It's not a medical program, it's a practical structure, one day at a time, for people who are ready to stop reading about this and start actually doing it. If that sounds like where you are right now, you'll find it linked below. There's a phrase that comes up in cardiovascular research, something researchers use to describe what happens when you give the vascular system consistent support over time. They call it cumulative benefit. Not dramatic, not overnight. Cumulative. Your vessels don't transform in a week, but they respond to every day of favorable input, every meal that supports nitric oxide production, every morning that includes something that gently eases inflammation inside those arterial walls, every week that you stay consistent with something small enough to actually keep doing. That's what this is about. Not a cure, not a shortcut, a direction. And every single one of the 7 things we talked about today is available to you right now, in a store near your home, for less than the cost of a copay, waiting to be used with intention instead of habit. Start with 1. Stay consistent. Watch what your body tells you. That's the whole thing. If this video gave you something genuinely useful, subscribing helps us keep making content like this. Practical, research-backed, and focused on what you can actually do. And if something in this video resonated with your experience, or if you have a question, leave it in the comments.